Welcome to ONC's preview of the ONC Usability Change Package. All attendees have been muted to prevent any background noise. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, and you may use your question box for that. This session is being recorded, and the slides are available in the handout section. The actual usability change package will be available within the next 2 weeks on the Health IT Playbook website. That information will be provided within the session. We're going to wait a few more minutes for others to sign on. Thank you again. Good afternoon. Welcome to ONC's preview of the Usability Change Package. This session is being recorded. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, and feel free to ask your questions using the question box. The slides are available for this session in the handout section of the webinar. The actual tool will be available on the Health IT Playbook website within the next week or so. That information will be provided during the session. Good afternoon. My name is Laverne Purley. I'm a nurse consultant and contracting officer representative for the Usability Change Package. Over the past year, ONC contracted with a team of clinicians, researchers, and usability experts to assess the impact of post-implementation decisions, identify gaps in resources, and the availability of tools to improve usability for end users to test in the field and across health systems. Many health IT products meet the usability definition. However, there still exists a lack of available resources for implementers. Today, we present to you the ONC Usability Change Package. The Change Package was developed to help end users identify, avoid, and mitigate usability concerns encountered after implementing an electronic health record system across healthcare settings and across various health IT vendor products. This tool will be available on the Health IT Playbook site within the next week or so. Please look out for an announcement on the ONC listserv when the tool will be added as an update. I'd like to introduce to you our panelists. First, we have Dr. Jonathan Wald, Dr. Jonathan Wald is a research scientist at RTI International, where his focus is improving health information technology design and use by providers and patients through mixed methods research on complex interventions and direct patient engagement in technology use. He has an MD from Brown, an MPH from Harvard, and is a fellow of the American College of Medical Informatics. Next, we have Dr. Laura Haig Marcial. She's a health informaticist research scientist in the Digital Health and Clinical Informatics Group of the Division of eHealth, Quality, and Analytics at RTI International. Her recent projects include assessing the usability of electronic health records and of the data and statistics resources of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene Public Access website, including risk management and quality assurance components. Dr. Marcial has experience with large-scale and high-profile projects, including enterprise solutions and a research interest in health informatics research methodology, usability assessment, analysis, and evaluation. Next is Dr. Zack Hettinger. He is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Georgetown University School of Medicine and medical director of MedStar Health National Center for Human Factors in Healthcare. He is board certified in both emergency medicine and clinical informatics. His research focuses on human factors engineering, patient safety, EHR usability, and cognitive informatics. Additional project team members for the usability change package development are listed here: Raj Watwani, Anita Samarth, Stephanie Riff, Katie Adams, Tracy Kim, and again, I am your host, Laverne Purley, and we also have Dr. Justin Cross, who is our medical director for system safety here at ONC, who's also involved in this project. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Laverne. This is Jonathan Wald from RTI, and I'm going to take the next section of the presentation. And I just want to start by thanking the ONC for sponsoring this webinar, as well as the work that we're going to be describing today in the project. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to introduce what we're going to be talking about by acknowledging that not only are EHR users facing challenges around usability, but oftentimes the challenges that they identify and that they need to work through are things that aren't always seen, or things that don't always materialize as they get ready to go live with their electronic health record systems and their health IT. Sometimes it's only once you're live and once you're starting to use the system that you begin to notice issues that you didn't anticipate. And sometimes understanding what those issues are and what's behind them can be challenging. So Go Live is the beginning of that journey to understand more about how to make systems usable and how to address challenges that come up from the perspective of thinking about it from a perspective of usability. And so identifying an issue, making changes to try to solve a problem, and then testing those changes to see, oftentimes if you can do it with metrics or with some kind of way of measuring change, can be an important and an essential way to improve usability-related problems. Another issue that we wanted to bring up in the beginning was that this takes know-how and it takes resources. And we think that the medium to low resource practices, whether that's small ambulatory practices or community hospitals, folks who don't have a large IT department and folks who don't have informatics experts are often facing kind of limited time and know-how as far as addressing usability challenges. And that was an important focus for our work. Next slide. So before we get into this too much further, we just wanted to say a little bit about usability and the way that we're defining it and approaching it. So the definition that we're using, it's the extent to which a system supports a user to efficiently and effectively achieve their desired goals. And that comes from the International Organization of Standardization. There's many different ways to describe usability and to define it. We took a pretty broad approach. We see usability as part of a scientific discipline of human factors, and usability can be measured both quantitatively and qualitatively. For example, you could examine error rates, you can measure time on task, and you can measure changes as you make interventions. So that would be a quantitative example. It's also very helpful to talk with users, to observe, to use other qualitative methods to diagram out workflows, for example, and to identify where there may be additional cognitive loads or extra steps or sort of other factors that impact usability. But usability as a term and as a concept is not very precise, and the graphic sort of makes that point, that there's a lot of different factors that come into play when you hear somebody say, yeah, this system is working well for me, I like the usability, or on the other hand, when there are challenges. Next slide, please. This slide is a chance to talk a little bit more about the kinds of problems that people face and some of the research behind that. There was a study that was published in 2016 by Raj Ratwani, Zack Hettinger, who's one of our presenters today, and their colleagues, including the ONC folks, in which they did a systematic literature review as well as interviews. And their focus was really to try to understand the breadth of the intersection between usability challenges and safety. And what they found was that there were a lot of differences between products as implemented compared to products as demoed, which was not surprising, but as you can imagine, that may lead to unanticipated issues once you've gone live. They found that there were relatively few practical tools that were out there to help individuals and groups identify usability-related safety issues. They also found that oftentimes when EHR, during implementation of EHRs, as configuration decisions are made or customizations are made, that those are often done without a focus on human factors principles, and that can add risk to the way that the system is ultimately designed and used. They found that workflow decisions as well were not always informed by best practices. There was kind of a lot of organizations are kind of discovering their way or finding their way, even though other organizations have been challenged by similar problems and maybe even have good solutions to those problems. And then finally, they reported that it was not uncommon that after training and after initial go live, that things didn't always change that much. There were limited improvements after that point even though there were definitely problems to address. And so in particular, when you think about how smaller healthcare practices and institutions kind of grapple with those issues that are found across the board, it's important to try to steer towards products that get high marks for usability. And UCD stands for user-centered design. To implement with the kinds of appropriate expertise and support that'll move you towards best practices whenever possible. To figure out which parts of the EHR it's okay to customize or even should be customized because that improves usability without detracting or somehow diminishing the overall function of the product, because there's ways to make changes that actually reduce usability. And that practices should focus on how to identify and ameliorate usability-related concerns after go live, not just while their training resources are around and not just while they're early on in their implementation. If we can go to the next slide. Our work in this project and what we'll be describing for the rest of the webinar is something that we're calling a change package or a usability change package. And our goal was to help to develop a tool and a mechanism so that organizations, especially lower to mid-resource organizations, could identify and ameliorate these usability-related issues. And so we set out to collect and present resources that would enable and accelerate usability improvements. As I mentioned, we targeted, as we did this, towards users who are implementing EHRs, who are quality improvement project leaders. In other words, those who have, who are in the right kind of position to recognize IT-related challenges and to do something about it. That we aim to serve these medium to low resource practices, and that work to improve usability, you know, it's not like you can just turn a key and make the change. It requires having general knowledge about usability in the first place, and then it requires being able to find problems that have a dimension of usability as part of them, to develop some kind of improvement activity, and then to measure and repeat the cycle. So if we can go to the next slide. Our approach to the project was really through 3 steps. The first step was to identify and collect an initial set of resources, and we restricted our search to those that were publicly available and those that we felt and our TEP, we had a technical expert panel advising us as well, felt would be helpful, especially to non-experts. The second major activity was to test those resources in the field, and then the final product of our work is this usability change package that we'll be talking about today, and that will be released very soon. Next slide. So this is a just quick summary that the project team was led by RTI with close collaboration with MedStar and the National Center for Human Factors, as well as Clinovations, Government and Health. And as a team, we engaged over this 18-month timeline in 3 phases of work. The first phase to draft the usability change package, and we had input from the TEP, as I mentioned, and we established kind of an initial set of resources through that part of the project. Then we went out into the field and took that kind of iteratively developing usability change package to 4 different clinical sites that were doing work to improve usability. And we tested it out and got their feedback. And then in the third 6 months of the project, we worked to finalize the usability change package, worked to get it ready for release, and it is now ready, and to continue to have TEP input throughout the project. And on the next slide, I wanted to acknowledge, this slide as well as the following, I wanted to just acknowledge the members of our technical expert panel who were quite engaged during the project, took time to review materials as we developed them, were very interested in what we were doing and trying to make it better. The TEP was a combination of folks from a variety of different organizations and kinds of organizations, from EHR vendors to foundations, to usability consultants, to the VA, to academic organizations, and so on. So we definitely want to thank and appreciate the members of the TEP. So with that, I'd like to transition over to Zack Hettinger, who's going to take us through some discussion about our methods and the testing that I introduced a minute ago.
Thanks, John. This is Zack Hettinger again, and we can move on to the next slide. Great. So what we ended up doing was going across a bunch of different sites, 4 different clinical sites, and really wanted to engage those sites with kind of low to medium resources primarily around the use of the change package. We knew that in this setting where there were going to be people that had varying degrees of familiarity with usability, varying expertise in informatics and health systems, and wanted to really engage them to make sure that this change package and access to the resources involved would be accessible to them. At each of the sites, we engaged with 2 to 3 different representatives from the site to get a wide range of users across those different systems. The data collection methods we used primarily were surveys, both in the pre-implementation period, so when we initially engaged with each of the sites to gain an assessment of their knowledge around usability and informatics and health IT systems, and then to re-engage with them at the end of the project after they had selected a particular project to work on to gain an assessment of their change in their understanding around usability and improving the usability of their particular EHR. We also use semi-structured interviews and focus group methodologies to engage with each of the groups during the process to understand both the strengths and limitations of the usability change package, as well as to make sure that we understood specific challenges to each of the different settings. Next slide. So here we have our specific test sites. As I said, we engaged in 4 different sites with a range of specialties from orthopedics to multiple community-based specialties in a hospital setting, as well as an ambulatory setting with internal medicine and OBGYN, and then again another hospital setting, site 4, that had multiple specialties across the hospital. Each of the facilities, each of the sites that we worked with had a different EHR vendor, Allscripts, Cerner, Athena, and Epic. And again, these were spread across multiple care settings, both ambulatory as well as smaller and larger based hospitals. And then the populations were also diverse from rural to urban settings. And at each of the sites, there was varying degrees of resources available to the settings. Anything from really no dedicated IT staff and using third-party consultants and kind of their own learn as they go to other places, especially Site 4, that really had a significant health informatics department with significant usability experience. Next slide. At each of those sites, we started to gain an appreciation for the roles of the users that were going to be engaging and improving the usability of their particular EHR, and started to design in an iterative manner the change package around those different user roles. So those ranged from practice managers to physicians to informatics nurses expertise. Some of the facilities had directors of informatics, and then certainly chief medical information officers. And we started to kind of describe their particular expertise that they would bring to approaching improving the usability of their EHR. So from administrative expertise to clinical expertise, informatics, and usability expertise. And while certainly these roles would move around a little bit, and there's definitely a lot of leeway, and that and physicians wouldn't necessarily only have clinical expertise in some settings, they might also have informatics or usability expertise. We wanted to try and make sure that, again, that the change package would be accessible to different roles with different levels of expertise and different ways that they would be approaching the particular problem, and not assume that this was a guide that would not be need to be a one-size-fits-all. Go ahead, next slide. From our initial pre-implementation surveys, these were the range of responses we got from the amount of experience that people had in their particular position. So no one was brand new in their position. They had been there all at least 2 years or more. In terms of implementing and optimizing, again, we had a range anywhere from 2 to more than 10 years of experience in implementing and optimizing electronic health records. 50-50 split around whether the individuals that we worked with had any formal training around implementing and optimizing, and then getting an idea of how familiar they are with the term of usability as it relates to electronic health records. And again, a range of responses from never hearing it before, no prior experience, to very familiar with the terminology. Next up, there we go. And so wanted to just kind of give you an idea of the range of projects. The goal for our interactions with the sites was not to dictate what project they took on, but to, again, try and simulate the use of the change package as we would see it once it was distributed. Putting the change package in the hands of the individual sites, having them read through and review the change package itself, and then work on selecting a particular project that they wanted to tackle during the course of the project. The first project was optimizing workflow of communication for surgical scheduling. The particular site was running into usability challenges with their installed system, and how the physicians and office staff were able to track and schedule surgeries for their patients, and running into interoperability issues across the different EHRs that the physicians interacted with, in addition to their kind of home-based system. The second project was implementing EHR radiology clinical decision support tools and integrating that clinical decision support into their current EHR and meeting current regulations and anticipated regulations. The third project revolved around analyzing the effect of EHR upgrades on quality metric reporting, and looking at some of the issues with upgrading their EHR and how they could manage that, as well as meeting quality metric reporting requirements. And then the last project was integrating a patient transport communication system into the EHR to prevent delays and patient safety events. That at that particular site, the team was concerned about the communication between different departments, and trying to integrate that into the EHR for better tracking and better turnaround times, and reducing potential delays in care. So you can see a wide range of different projects that were kind of anticipated as major usability issues by each of the sites, and how they tried to use the change package to address these beyond what they maybe had done in the past as their own action addressing usability. Next slide. And so some of the lessons that we learned from the individual sites as we took this iterative approach was that some of the sites found that collecting actual data just in anticipation of implementing the project led to some significant short-term process changes. So not even just addressing the health IT system itself, but really started to understand the socio-technical systems approach of the interaction between the users, the system, the regulations, and then the workflow and kind of culture of that individual site. So some of them were able to actually start addressing things even before they made changes to their EHR that they anticipated would help with the eventual usability change to their system. They also were found that certainly looking at the EHR and monitoring over time for impact on workflows of specifically of looking at EHR system upgrades helped them better understand some of the challenges around meeting quality metrics that they maybe had not anticipated or had kind of experienced but not really quantified as they were previously to using the change package. One of the sites specifically gave some feedback around challenges with implementing usability changes and as they relate to regulations and changes and kind of shifting regulations and timelines, as well as trying to kind of integrate those in with other necessary changes and upgrades to their EHR. So a lot of competing requirements as well as prioritization and how that impacted the change package implementation. And then lastly, one of the key pieces was the communication, the necessary communication between healthcare organizations and their EHR vendors. And that we certainly found the feedback from several of the sites that two-way communication between the vendor and the site in addressing these usability change packages, especially in the lower to kind of moderate resourced environments, was really critical to the success and improvement of the usability of their system. And that operating as an island was a significant challenge for the sites. Next slide. When at the end of the study, when we put out our post-implementation survey to the participants at each of the sites, just wanted to highlight some of the initial feedback that we got. They found that some of the most useful sections of the change package that we'll be reviewing shortly involved our addition of an EHR checklist around addressing usability in the EHR, the use of vignettes and case studies that we'll go over shortly. They also appreciated some of the improvements in the change package from the time that it was used at their particular sites to the final version, was that would recommend a little bit more guidance around utilizing and engaging with the EHR vendors, and then specific instructions around using the change package and its tools, which we've addressed in this final version. And then some of the issues that they ran into that decreased the effectiveness of the specific projects, they really noted were around clinical provider acceptance and physician burnout. So constant changes to the system or trying to address that specific project that was implemented. Some of them found that they really didn't run into any significant issues, and they were able to implement and use the change package to effectively change their practice at their particular site. They ran into issues around coming up with a specific project, but that in the end, having to change sometimes the scope or the overall timeline based on competing priorities or the anticipated cost to implementing or lack of communication with the vendor. And then there were significant challenges in identifying specific EHR usability problems. At some of the sites, especially those that had less experience around usability, just engaging the conversation and starting to talk about EHR usability was sometimes a challenge, but then once started using some examples around what EHR usability challenges can be, oftentimes the conversation took off from there, and that really was reflected in some of the later developments and changes to the change package to address those needs of users that might be less familiar with the usability concepts. And we'll be reviewing those shortly. Next slide. And lastly, just wanted to kind of note that that we did get significant overall positive feedback around the navigation of the tool. We really, as John alluded to, we took an iterative nature, and some of the earliest versions were really wire-based frameworks so that the users could navigate through them, and we significantly took in a lot of that feedback to change the way they navigated. And so that showed in the post-implementation surveys. And I think lastly, I want to close on one quote from the survey where the participant said, this should make everyone reflect on their internal change processes and evaluate changes to EHR with a proactive mindset in order to mitigate errors that impact any clinician or, more importantly, the patient. So it was great to see that this project was a success from those 4 sites, and we believe that taking this iterative approach and getting this out into real-world users made this a much more powerful tool, and we're looking forward to sharing this more widely with all of you. Next slide. And with that, I will hand this over to Laura Marcial, who will talk about the specific change package. There you go.
Thank you so much. We just have to do a couple of switches. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yep, looks like you can. So hi, I'm Laura Marcial, Health Informaticist with RTI International. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now we get to move on to some of the fun work. We get to take a look at the change package itself together. So barring any technical issues, I'll be running a couple of short videos. They won't have any audio with them. I'll be sort of narrating what we see, but hopefully that will all convey to you. To meet the needs of our intended audience, we elected to create a pretty interactive PDF file. So we're sort of pushing the limits of the PDF technology, straddling the line between a typical static document or PDF and a more versatile sort of web page or mini application. So we've employed on mouse over and hover events for definitions and references, internal bookmarks, external hyperlinks, and some other limited interactivity throughout the document. And so, yeah, we're going to show you a series of 4 short videos to introduce you to the change package. So the first one will be kind of just the introduction to navigation and how the overall structure of the change package came together. So as you can see, this is the home page of our document, the ONC change package for improving usability. There is a new version you will have access to. So if you see some minor changes, that's the reason. You can see some navigation at the top, linked to an introduction and checklist. Go to the preparing for a change, problem finding, locating a tool, implementing a solution, or browse the additional resources section. You can also use the shortcut buttons to print a copy, go to the table of contents, and return to this home page easily. Here on the home page, we've added a link to the Quick Start Guide, which is like a visual table of contents. It's intended to help the user get oriented to the change package quickly. We've used this sort of analogy of dive depth as a way to describe where and how a user can get started with the change package. Here, there are users that are just getting started, who might benefit from the introduction and EHR checklist or example section. There are users who are pretty comfortable with usability who can dive right into the preparing for change and problem finding sections. And then there are users who are experienced with EHR usability who might be ready to go straight to the implementing a solution, locating a tool, and additional resources sections. Note that at the bottom, you have the ability to use back and next buttons, and there's a detailed standard style table of contents to help you navigate through the document. If we link to the introduction section, you can see some resources to help with getting started using the change package. There's a where to begin, a guide to using the change package, and then a purpose section. And there are hover events for terms and references throughout the document to help orient the user and keep them familiar with the content that sort of sits inside the resource. So we're going to move on to the next video. This next video, yep, great, I see it playing now. We'll focus on the concept of the new user, someone who might not be very familiar with EHR usability. Take a look at the introduction, the last video. So in this one, we'll focus a little more on the EHR checklist or examples list, where we bring up some fairly common usability issues in an interactive format. The basic idea with this component is to help sort of jog the mind of the user and tee up some thought-provoking usability examples organized by type, basic design issues on the left and information support issues on the right. The shaded area presents a kind of an example or scenario. The question box asks the user to consider whether a similar problem exists in their own environment, and they have the ability to sort of interact with the system a little bit. The links provided drive the users into the detailed case studies that are provided in the problem finding section of the document. In the final version, the interaction has changed a little bit, but the basic idea is the same. Present the usability problem, ask if it applies to the user, and provide a way to link deeper into the change package to help resolve it. After visiting the initial test sites, we realized that our case studies needed to be more intuitive, organized around how the problem might be identified, and illustrative of the kind of dialogue sites might be having to identify issues. So we elected to build a couple of more interactive case studies in response. This particular case study on vendor support provides a visually compelling sort of stepwise review of the process one of our sites actually engaged in to identify their problem and begin to work toward a solution. Here, we've liberally adjusted the storyline to create a stepwise process analogous to the layout of the change package to identify and address an EHR usability problem. Move on to our third video. In the third video, we're exploring a user who's already comfortable with the concept of EHR usability, but looking for more direction about identifying their problem or problems and how to type them and then maybe find solutions. So with this user type, we assume that they're already pretty familiar with the basics of EHR usability, but they might be looking for more ideas about how to identify and then address problems. We've created a variety of case study scenarios that might help in problem identification. These range from vendor support example in the last video to EHR updates, help desk tickets, process improvement, and interdisciplinary team communication. We've moved into an era where EHR updates are common and can wreak havoc with a previously stable usability environment. Each of the case studies follows a standard format, which includes a description, an example, an issue, and an action within the example with links to deeper resources listed in the tools section. Here, in this particular example, we've linked out to the Safer Guides tool in the Locating a Tool section to demonstrate how these pages are structured. So jumping from one section to another within the guide to show how those interlinkages work. For each item in the tools section, there's an assessment of the phase of impact and the estimated effort to use a resource, a description, a list of strengths and areas of improvement, and a series of, if applicable, of external hyperlinks to the resources themselves in the box at right. And these do link out to live sites to provide context and some deeper resources. We'll move on to the fourth and final video. In this video, we track the users who is already experienced with EHR usability, who might be looking for a specific resource to address a previously identified problem. The sections on locating a tool, implementing a solution, and additional resources might be particularly useful in this case. The tools listed in the Locating a Tool section range from resources to address broad EHR usability issues like the Safer Guides to more specific issues with clinical decision support, planning for an EHR transition, and quality improvement. On the Planning for EHR Transition page, we'll get to revisit the highly structured document paradigm that we use to organize these resources. We see that there's a hazard analysis stage. We see that the phase of impact is a hazard analysis stage and the estimated effort is moderate. There's a brief description of the resource and a listing of core strengths and areas for improvement. And then again, in the tools box at right, we offer an external hyperlink to the actual resource. You can see that this particular resource, which takes a little while to load, is part of the Health Information Technology Evaluation and Quality Center, or HITECH. We've been exploring ways to provide persistent links to these externally linked resources so the information can be retained even when the links change. And that's a bit of a challenge in a dynamic web-based environment. But obviously an important thing for us to try to preserve. So as has been mentioned, we're expecting to have the finished version of this, which is also ADA compliant, live on the Health IT Playbook. More details on that to come from us. We wanted to just highlight in the next slide a couple of things about how the development of the change package was affected by the. Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Was affected by the the input that we got from the technical expert panel from the test sites and from the extended TEP network. So we got a lot of great advice on the framing of the goals of this project, on identifying the right audience, on figuring out who our users are and how they might be coming to the project or to this now product with different perspectives. We got a lot of input on how to make this whole product more user-friendly, on being clear and making sure that we were going to the right level of specificity with our language and with our case studies and approaches. We also were given a lot of good advice about meeting our users where they are, the context that they're in, and their sort of perspective. We got some very good feedback on the examples that we developed about how clear they were and how relevant they are to the audiences that we were targeting. We also got a lot of great feedback on making sure that the whole resource is well designed and ADA compliant. From the test sites, we got some really strong feedback on visual appeal, where we could extend content, especially in the sort of vendor relationship realm. We got a lot of great information from interacting with those sites about the user types, how we could elaborate on those, and how we could meet those users more clearly with the way that we structured the tool. And then, of course, we got some real hands-on experience or exposure to the practice environment and the challenges that they're facing. The extended TEP network, in the next slide, provided us with some broader feedback. They made some significant improvements to the sort of vendor dialogue in those two case studies where we tried to make them more interactive. We got some good information on overall information flow in the document. We did several rounds of restructuring to try to get that right, and we got some really great feedback on how to strike the right balance for communicating with the audience as we intended. We want to stress that some of the feedback indicated that this change package has the potential to make a significant contribution to the field as a usability primer and reference guide. And I want to remind you that you can post questions. We will do Q&A at the end of this, but feel free to type your questions into the question box if you haven't. And again, that we'll be in touch with you about the URL and where this ends up in the Health IT playbook. And I think I'm handing back to John.
Great, thanks very much, Laura. I'm just going to now talk for a couple of minutes and sort of wrap things up, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And again, please feel free to put questions into the question box if you like. The couple of comments as we wrap up. Part of our work was to also identify what were the major gaps and challenges that we encountered during the project in gathering resources and putting them together and working with the test sites, talking with the TEP. And so there were three gaps that we wanted to talk about. The first one here is that there are a number of resources that are helpful for addressing usability challenges that are specific to vendor products that are shared as part of consulting engagements, that are part of user communities that may be closed off to the public. And that's not a problem, and it's pretty natural that many of these things required resources to develop, and so it makes sense that they're part of an implementation package or part of a community of users for a particular product. But if our broader aim in doing this work is to think about usability challenges as very, very common and kind of requiring a lot of attention, especially from folks who don't have a large budget for engaging consultants and doing this kind of work, then then this may be a little bit of an issue. So the gap here, the question it raises is, what can be done to further increase access to the kind of knowledge and tools that would help with improving usability post-implementation for EHRs and other forms of health IT. So on the next slide, we talk about a second gap, sorry about that, which is just identifying that usability requires coordination between frontline users and a lot of experts. So having users who know what works and doesn't work in a particular workflow, talking and working with IT specialists who often themselves may not be experts in the frontline information that the users have. And as well, there's a need for deep system knowledge because some of these problems are complex. All of that together and communicating that and working together as a team is often critical to working through usability challenges. So it leads us to think about and to recommend future work in how to keep the conversation going and how to encourage recognition that this kind of like multi-expert approach is oftentimes really important. And then on the next slide, we've got the third identified gap, which is that sometimes usability issues that are identified and maybe even seem straightforward and simple have a kind of deeper complexity underneath them. So because EHRs themselves are really almost like platforms where there are multiple applications and application components that are brought together for a pretty complex work, it's very common for a usability problem that's experienced in one place, let's say while you're looking at documentation, to have its origins in a lab system feed that's bringing laboratory information into that documentation. So it's not always direct. And these components are usually designed to work together in very specific ways. But when they get implemented locally at a specific, in a specific instance of the EHR, those assumptions or those expectations may be broken. So, so understanding this kind of complexity, it sort of underscores the need to take a systems view when you're looking at usability issues and challenges. So we go to the next slide. And the let's just get here. So the last slide is just a set of some conclusions that our aim was to provide a basic introduction through the usability change package to usability concepts and to present knowledge that would help the users develop feasible, actionable improvements and be able to recognize usability challenges and work through ways to not only make improvements, but to measure the change. Secondly, that this usability change package is really geared, as we've said, for usability challenges that can be more locally addressed. So the idea is to identify problems that are facing the organization, the small practice, and to be able to actually solve those problems rather than sort of put them on hold and have to wait for either money or other resources to be able to get help, or sometimes wait for a vendor to make a new release. Those are oftentimes what needs to happen, but the goal of this project and this tool was to really help jumpstart the process with things that could be addressed locally. We talked a number of times during the project about the idea that the learning that took place through working with the sites, working with the TEP, and developing the resources and the approach to the usability change package was something that a number of folks thought should be ongoing. And so ideas came up like, could there be a virtual space or place where developers and implementation teams and user experience teams could all come together and collaborate to improve usability, share best practices or stories and that sort of thing. And the last point is that the need to address usability challenges, to identify those challenges, it's just going to continue because EHRs change with every new release. Healthcare changes in terms of the workflows and the demands that are being placed on everybody who's part of the system. And so those naturally lead to new usability challenges. So we think that usability is an area that will never completely go away as a problem, and it's important to kind of approach that there's value in training and in learning and learning how to address these things through improvement projects. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide, and I'll turn it back over to Laverne.
Thank you. I'm going to see if we have any questions, and then I'll come back to that slide at the end.
Laverne, this is Laura. I was just going to quickly update you that there is a live URL of the change package, and I did send it around to the entire group, and there was a post to that effect in the questions as well.
Thanks, Laura. Can we go to the questions, and then we'll share the information about the link with all?
Yeah, there are a number of questions in the question section of the webinar here. Would you like me to read through some of them?
Yeah, and I'll start collecting the information to send out about the link.
Great. So one of the first questions is, and thank you, there's a number of sort of suggestions, that's fantastic, about the change package itself. And this might be a good question for Justin, just to give you a heads up, whether the change package was developed with the idea of it serving as a tool in testing EHRs for the usability certification criteria.
No, I don't think that there was any link there.
That's correct, Justin.
There's also a question about whether the change package includes usability templates to perform qualitative or quantitative outcome evaluations. Zach or Laura or John?
This is Zach. There aren't specific templates that are in there. We were really trying to point users to specific resources that would help them and not necessarily develop new resources. As you go through the change package, there are some particular tools out there that will help address very specific issues and others that are much more general that would kind of walk you through a little bit of the process. And then as Laura went through, there is the checklist and the templates in terms of the case scenarios that could kind of help an individual walk through some of the particular issues, and the vignettes as well. So while there isn't a specific template itself, there are different ways to walk people through how they might approach improving the usability of their particular EHR.
Also a question about how issues related to interoperability were included in the usability change package.
This is Zach again. We didn't specifically target interoperability. Part of that was guidance from the technical expert panel and trying to keep the scope of the document. So we weren't trying to address every single potential usability issue as they relate to electronic health records. Certainly something that can be tackled on later versions, but there wasn't a specific section focused on interoperability between EHRs.
I'm going to try to squeeze in two more here. So there was a question about what we meant by formal training in implementation and optimization when we defined our test subjects and I presume their level of understanding.
This is Zach again. We left that to the individual participants that were filling out the survey questions, what they felt was formal implementation optimization training. We did not specifically give them a list of individual pieces, but it left it up to the individuals filling out the survey.
Okay, great. And again, there were a number of questions about where this will be located, whether there will be access to this presentation, et cetera. I'll let Laverne answer those questions as we wrap up. But one last question is from Rebecca Meehan, who asked, what is an example of an outcome we would expect to see an organization organization achieve when they implement the change package, and whether we have any estimates about time or budget.
This is John. Maybe I can take that one. I guess it depends on what you mean by implement the change package. The change pack, I view the goal as implementing change in the organization. So for example, like the 4 sites, clinical sites that were part of the project, their focus was really on, improving a process that was a focus for them. And then the change package was a tool that, that helped them in some way. So I think implementing the change package, the way I would interpret the question is, what does it take to help your organization make use of this tool? And I think that'll vary, but the idea behind it is that as long as somebody has a link and has an interest, they can download this PDF file, they can interact with it, it will lead them to other resources, and it'll be, a starting point, especially for folks who have a basic idea of what usability is and what kind of approach can be helpful. So hopefully I interpreted that question well, but if not, I apologize.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to note, since we're just about out of time, our contact information is here. There's information to reach out if you have any questions about the resource itself once it's posted on the playbook. And then email addresses for both John and Zach. If you have a question that that we weren't able to get to that you'd really love to see answered, I'm going to go ahead and offer that I'm sure Zach and or John both would be happy to take that question offline if you would like to follow up with them via email. And since we have, we're out of time. Oh, sorry, John. Did I overspeak?
No, I just wanted to make one last comment, because when our team got ready to do this webinar, we were told that the change package was not yet live on the playbook. But it does appear that it is live, because Laura was able to send out a link based on a comment from one of the attendees. So so please know that apparently it's live, and we didn't know that at the beginning of the webinar, but that's great news. We knew they were working hard to get it live, and we didn't know the exact timing. So hopefully that will remain up, and we certainly are excited to be sharing it with you all.
Yeah, I'll turn it to Laverne to give us some additional instruction on that.
Stephanie, could you move the slides back 2 slides so we can have the playbook information slide available? Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Thank you for the team at RTI and all of the work that they put in to develop this change package. Thank you, Dr. Cross, for your input, and thank you for listening audience. Again, we do have your questions, and this webinar is being recorded. We'll make it available for you to play back on the healthit.gov website. And again, the change package is now available on the Playbook website, and it's located in the section under Step 1, and then you click on Workflow. and you'll be able to access it there. Again, we thank you everyone for your time.